She didn't come to Fort Carson to prove a point. Sarah Mitchell, a 45-year-old black veteran, just wanted to see her grandson, a fresh recruit. But when young lieutenants mocked her faded tattoo, whispering she was a fraud, a general stepped in. His words silenced the room, revealing a truth that humbled everyone. What was that tattoo, and why did it change everything? Have you ever seen someone judged unfairly? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and share this story if you value quiet heroism. Let's dive in. The morning air at Fort Carson, Colorado, felt sharp enough to cut. Dawn painted the Rocky Mountains red, casting jagged shadows across the base's main gate. Humvees growled to life, their diesel fumes mixing with the crisp scent of pine and dust. A bugle's faint call drifted from the training fields, where soldiers moved in tight formations, their boots pounding rhythm into the earth. The sign at the entrance read, Fort Carson, duty first, its letters weathered but proud, like the base itself. Everything here was built to endure, barracks, fences, even the people. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her battered SUV, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, a soldier's habit she never shook. Her civilian jacket hung loose, but when a gust of wind tugged at her scarf, a faded black eagle tattoo peeked out on her neck. She scanned the base, eyes tracing familiar paths, her face steady but soft with memory. This wasn't her first time here, though no one would guess why. At 45, she moved with purpose, her steps measured, carrying the weight of years most couldn't imagine. Sarah Mitchell stepped through the iron gates of Fort Carson, her worn boots grinding against the gravel path that wound toward the training grounds. The Colorado morning air carried a crisp bite, laced with the faint tang of pine and diesel from idling Humvees nearby. The rhythm of military life pulsed around her. Cadence calls, raw and rhythmic, rose from recruits jogging in tight formations, their breath steaming in the dawn chill. Sergeants' sharp barks sliced through the noise, each command a whip-crack of authority. Sunlight broke over the Rocky Mountains, glinting off the barracks' windows, casting fleeting patches of warmth across the cold gray pavement. Sarah's eyes, dark and steady, swept the scene, a faint smile ghosting her lips as memories stirred. Dusty deserts, sleepless nights, the weight of a rifle in her hands. She clutched an old visitor's pass, its edges frayed, ink faded from years tucked away in a drawer, and moved toward the reception post with purpose. Her posture, straight and unyielding, betrayed a soldier's discipline, though her civilian jacket hung loose, unmarked by rank or ribbon. Her hand lingered on the frayed scarf, a reflex from years of discipline, unnoticed by the recruits rushing past, their faces flushed with youthful purpose, gear clinking like soft chimes. One young soldier, barely 20, paused mid-stride, his brow furrowing at Sarah's quiet presence, her salt and pepper bun, the calm in her step. He hesitated, curiosity flickering, but a sergeant's shout pulled him back into the flow. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the glance. At 45, she'd long mastered blending in, carrying a past that didn't demand attention. Her focus stayed singular, finding her grandson, a new recruit lost in this sea of green. Yet, as she walked, the base's rhythm stirred something deeper, a shadow of missions unspoken, of nights when survival hung on a whispered order. She pressed on, a figure both ordinary and extraordinary, unnoticed but unforgettable. They didn't know her name, and they didn't care to ask. Sarah Mitchell moved past the Fort Carson shooting range, her boots steady on the sun-baked gravel, her visitor's pass tucked deep in her pocket. Her eyes stayed fixed on the path to the recruit barracks where her grandson trained. The morning sun burned high, its glare flashing off rifles lined up for drills, each one polished to a hard shine. The air snapped with the sharp pop of practice rounds, blending with the rhythm of shouted orders and clanging gear. Near a stack of ammo crates, 3 young lieutenants, Carter, Brooks, and Ellis, lounged with the ease of fresh rank, their uniforms starched to perfection. Carter, lanky and smug, spotted Sarah's faded jacket, the black eagle tattoo just visible above her scarf. He elbowed Brooks, his voice carrying sharp disdain. "Look at this lady, acting like some war hero. Bet that tattoo's from a cheap parlor downtown." Brooks leaned in, his grin sharp. "Probably spins tales of secret missions to anyone buying her a drink." Ellis, eager to prove his place, piled on, his tone thick with mockery. "Yeah, these types love spinning tales for attention. Never seen a real fight, just making it up for kicks." Their laughter cut through the air, harsh and deliberate, like a flag snapping in a gale, meant to sting without inviting a fight. A few soldiers nearby glanced over, some smirking, others shifting awkwardly, unsure if they should join in. Sarah's stride didn't waver, but her jaw tightened, her hands steady at her sides, betraying nothing. She'd faced worse, taunts sharper than these, nights when bullets were closer than words. At 45, she knew how to let malice slide, but their ignorance weighed heavier than their scorn, each word a spark in dry grass. Her focus stayed on her grandson, a new recruit somewhere in this maze of grit and green. These boys, puffed up with untested rank, thought they knew war from manuals and drills. They didn't know her, didn't know the places she'd been, where survival hung on a single breath. Their challenge, unasked for, lingered like smoke, daring her to answer, though she walked on, her purpose unbroken, her past a shadow they couldn't see. Sarah Mitchell stood at the reception desk of Fort Carson's training center, her weathered visitor's pass sliding across the counter toward Private Jenkins. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the scuffed floor, while the distant pop of gunfire from the range drifted through the walls. Jenkins, barely old enough to shave, squinted at the pass, then at his computer screen, his fingers hesitating over the keys. "Ma'am, this pass is outdated. System's flagging it. I need officer approval." His voice wavered, caught between protocol and uncertainty. Sarah nodded, her face calm, though her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She'd been through enough red tape to know arguing wouldn't help. Before she could step aside, Lieutenant Carter sauntered over, his boots clicking with purpose, a smirk curling his lips. "Trouble, Jenkins?" "Let me see that." He snatched the pass, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "Looks like something my kid could forge. People try this all the time, claiming they're somebody." His eyes flicked to Sarah's jacket, her posture steady as stone. "You got any proof you belong here, ma'am?" The word ma'am dripped with mockery. Brooks and Ellis lingered nearby, chuckling softly, their arms crossed like they were watching a show. Jenkins shifted, uneasy, his gaze darting between Sarah and Carter. Sarah took a slow breath, her voice steady, but edged with steel. "I'm here to see my grandson. That's all." Her eyes flicked briefly to the floor, as if grounding herself against a rising tide of memory, dust and blood, battles these boys couldn't fathom. Carter leaned closer, undeterred. "Sure, but rules are rules. Maybe come back with something official." Another soldier, prompted by Carter's nod, stepped forward, blocking Sarah's path to the barracks. "Need to check your bag first." The air grew thick, the weight of their assumptions pressing down. Sarah held her ground, her eyes never leaving Carter's, a silent challenge she hadn't sought but wouldn't back down from. Sarah Mitchell stood rigid at the Fort Carson reception desk, her patience fraying like the edges of her old jacket. The fluorescent lights hummed, a grating drone over the distant crackle of the shooting range. Private Jenkins fumbled with her outdated pass, his screen flashing red, while Lieutenant Carter's smirk lingered, his voice still echoing with mockery. "Rules are rules," he'd said, dismissing her as a fraud. The air in the training center grew heavy, thick with the weight of their laughter. Carter, Brooks, and Ellis, their starched fatigues crisp with new rank. Sarah finally turned, her voice low but cutting like a blade through the chatter. "You think this is a game?" The words landed hard, silencing the room. Soldiers froze mid-step, their gear clinking softly. Brooks shifted uncomfortably. Ellis's grin faltered. Carter opened his mouth to retort, but heavy boots echoed over the scuffed floor, deliberate and commanding. General Daniel Coleman stepped into the light, his silver hair catching the glow, his worn OCPs carrying the dust of real battlefields. His eyes locked on Sarah, narrowing at the black eagle tattoo peeking from her scarf. The room held its breath. "Black echoes," he said, his voice steady, like a man reading a map only he could see. "Afghanistan, 2010. Sarah met his gaze, her spine straightening, a soldier's instinct kicking in. She nodded once, her face unreadable, but her eyes sharp, measuring him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some whispered, "Black echoes? Never heard of it," while others muttered, "She doesn't look like a soldier." Carter's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of doubt. Coleman stepped closer, his presence pulling every eye in the room. "That tattoo," he said, his tone shifting, not questioning now but knowing. "It's not from some dive bar. It's a mark of a unit most of you will never read about." The whispers grew, skeptical, curious, uncertain. Jenkins clutched the pass, his hands trembling, while the lieutenants stood straighter, their confidence cracking like thin ice. Sarah didn't move, didn't speak, but her silence carried weight, a story etched in the lines of her face, in the tattoo that marked her past. The general's voice softened, but it carried across the stillness. "I know that mark. I owe my life to it." The air shifted, heavy with something unspoken, a truth hanging between them like smoke over a battlefield. No one laughed now. Sarah's eyes held Coleman's, a shared history flickering in the quiet, while the young soldiers stood caught, unsure of what they'd just stumbled into. General Daniel Coleman's voice carried through the hushed Fort Carson training center, each word landing like a stone in still water. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, but the room felt darker now, as if the weight of his words had dimmed the air. Sarah Mitchell stood before him, her black eagle tattoo barely visible above her scarf, her hand steady, as if still holding a rifle from that night. The young lieutenants, Carter, Brooks, and Ellis, stood frozen, their earlier smirks replaced by tight-lipped unease. Soldiers around them shifted, their boots scuffing softly, eyes darting between the general and the woman they'd dismissed as a fraud. Coleman's gaze never left Sarah, his weathered face etched with respect. "Afghanistan, 2010, he said, his voice steady, but laced with something deeper, something personal. Black Echoes ran a mission outside Kandahar. My convoy was pinned in a kill zone. 3 vehicles, 60 men, no air support. Taliban had us from the high ground, picking us off like targets at a fair. We were done." He paused, letting the memory settle. Then she came through the ravine, leading her team. No backup, no orders. "They drew fire, gave us the gap to break free. I'm standing here because of her." Whispers crept in. "No way she pulled that off," one said. Another scoffed. "Triple black ops. That's above our clearance." A third voice, quieter, wondered, "What if it's true?" Carter's eyes flicked to Brooks, doubt lingering in his stance. Sarah didn't flinch, her posture unyielding, a soldier's calm forged in chaos. She wasn't here to prove them wrong. Not then, not now. Coleman's voice sharpened, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. That unit ran triple black ops. No records, no press, no glory. Most of the Pentagon thinks they're a myth, but I was there, and I know what I saw. He turned to Sarah, his tone softening, almost reverent. You were with them from the start, weren't you? Operation Dust Veil, then Kandahar. Sarah's eyes met his, dark and unflinching, carrying years of unspoken weight. I was, she said simply, her voice low but clear, like a truth that didn't need shouting. The lieutenants stiffened, their confidence crumbling further, but the whispers didn't stop. Coleman's jaw tightened, but he didn't address the crowd. His focus stayed on Sarah, a shared understanding passing between them, forged in places these kids would never see. The air held a charge now, like the moment before a storm breaks, the truth of her past hanging heavy, undeniable to some, impossible to others. The Fort Carson training center fell silent as General Daniel Coleman's words about Sarah Mitchell's past sank in, the hum of fluorescent lights swallowed by the weight of her unspoken history. Lieutenants Carter, Brooks, and Ellis stood rigid, their earlier smirks replaced by uneasy glances, while whispers of doubt, black echoes, a myth, faded into the background. Coleman gestured toward a small office off the hall, his boots echoing with deliberate purpose across the concrete. Sarah followed, her steps measured, her hands brushing her scarf, the black eagle tattoo hidden once more. Inside, the air carried the stale scent of old coffee, a cluttered desk piled with maps and faded reports, relics of battles long past. Evening light slanted through a narrow window, casting amber streaks across the walls, warming the cold steel of a filing cabinet. Coleman closed the door, his weathered face urgent but measured. Sarah, those kids out there, they're skilled, but their arrogance is a death sentence waiting to happen. They need to see what real experience looks like. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her arms crossed tightly, her posture unyielding. I don't need their approval, General. I came for my grandson, not to play their games. Her voice was low, edged with a conviction that filled the small room, steady as a heartbeat. Coleman leaned against the desk, his hands gripping its edge, his tone earnest. I know you don't. You never did. But I've seen pride like theirs turn good soldiers reckless, cost lives in moments that don't forgive mistakes. He paused, his gaze steady, carrying the weight of their shared past in Afghanistan's dust-choked ravines. You can break that illusion, Sarah. Show them what Black Echoes taught you. I trust you to do it right, for the men they'll lead. Sarah turned to the window, her silhouette sharp against the fading light, her fingers tracing the edge of her scarf as memories surged. Young soldiers lost to overconfidence, their faces etched in her mind, their blood a lesson in humility's cost. She exhaled, her reluctance bending under the truth of his words. Fine, she said, meeting his eyes, her voice resolute. Not for them. For the ones they might lead astray. Coleman's face softened, a faint nod sealing their pact. 3 challenges: shooting, tactics, combat. Make it clear what's at stake. Sarah gave a single nod, her expression unwavering. A soldier stepping back into a fight she'd sworn to leave behind. The office grew still, the distant clatter of the bass muffled by the walls, their agreement a quiet vow to forge humility from arrogance, to save lives with truth. The Fort Carson shooting range baked under the Colorado sun, its red dust swirling as soldiers gathered near the firing line. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her civilian jacket loose, the black eagle tattoo on her neck catching a glint of light. Lieutenants Carter, Brooks, and Ellis stood among the crowd, their arms crossed, faces tight with skepticism. The sharp crack of rifles echoed, each round punctuating the tension in the air. General Coleman had set the first challenge: marksmanship, a test of precision under pressure. The lieutenants went first, their shots ringing out with practiced rhythm, hitting perfect tens on static targets. Carter smirked, wiping sweat from his brow, confident they'd set an untouchable standard. Whispers rippled through the onlookers, impressed but expectant. Then Sarah took her place, her movements economical, like she'd done this 1,000 times. She loaded her rifle with a calm that silenced the crowd, her scar faintly visible as she raised the weapon. The targets shifted, moving, popping up, vanishing in seconds, the hardest drill the range offered. Sarah fired, her shots a blur, each one striking dead center. She finished in half the lieutenant's time, her face blank, no trace of pride. The crowd gasped, a low murmur spreading. Carter muttered, "Just luck," but his voice lacked conviction. Brooks shifted, his eyes narrowing, while Ellis stared at the targets, mouth slightly open. The scoreboard flashed. Perfect, faster, unmatched. Sarah lowered her rifle, her breathing steady, as if she'd just walked across a room, not outshot the base's best. The air felt charged, like the moment after a lightning strike, the lieutenant's confidence cracking under the weight of her skill. She didn't look at them, didn't need to. Her focus was elsewhere, on the lesson General Coleman wanted her to teach, on the lives that hung on humility in places these young soldiers hadn't seen. The range fell quiet, save for the faint clink of spent casings hitting the ground, as the reality of her ability settled over the crowd, undeniable but still questioned by a few stubborn voices. The Fort Carson training hall buzzed as Sarah Mitchell faced the second challenge. Screens glowed in the tactical simulation room, mapping a virtual battlefield. Dusty ravines, enemy snipers, shifting sands. Lieutenants Carter, Brooks, and Ellis led their team with textbook precision, their commands sharp, strategy rigid but polished. The crowd nodded, impressed by their discipline. Then Sarah stepped up, her voice calm, directing her virtual squad with quiet authority. She ignored protocol, weaving through chaos with unorthodox moves, flanking through blind spots, seizing fleeting gaps, turning terrain into a weapon. Her team outmaneuvered the lieutenants in half the time, screens flashing her victory. Brooks muttered, "She's bending the rules," but the scoreboard silenced him. The hall hummed, doubt turning to awe. Sarah's movements were fluid, honed by years unseen, her focus unbreakable. Carter's jaw tightened. Ellis stared, stunned. General Coleman watched, his nod subtle but heavy. The air crackled with her skill, a lesson etched in every move, humbling those who thought they knew war. Under Fort Carson's stark floodlights, Sarah Mitchell faced the final challenge: hand-to-hand combat. 5 of the base's strongest soldiers stood in the ring, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. Lieutenants Carter, Brooks, and Ellis watched, their confidence shattered from the tactical loss. The referee counted, 1, 2, 3, start, and Sarah moved, a blur of precision. Each soldier took a single, swift strike, shoulder, wrist, knee, and hit the ground, stunned. 5 seconds, 5 men down. The crowd erupted, gasps turning to cheers. Carter's jaw dropped. Ellis looked away, cheeks burning. Sarah stepped back, her breathing even, her black eagle tattoo catching the light. She didn't gloat, didn't linger, her focus inward, as if fighting for a truth forged in battles these soldiers couldn't imagine. Coleman's nod carried respect, the air electric with the weight of her victory. The lieutenant's arrogance lay broken, their doubts drowned by her skill. The Fort Carson training center fell silent as the dust settled from Sarah Mitchell's final challenge. The floodlights cast long shadows across the combat ring, where Lieutenants Carter, Brooks, and Ellis stood. Heads bowed, their earlier swagger gone. The crowd of soldiers watched, their murmurs fading into a heavy quiet. Sarah adjusted her jacket, her hand brushing her scarf, hiding the black eagle tattoo once more as she stepped toward the exit. Carter cleared his throat, his voice low. "Ma'am, we were wrong. I'm sorry." Brooks and Ellis nodded, their faces flushed with shame. Sarah paused, her dark eyes steady, measuring them not with anger, but with the weight of experience. "On the battlefield," she said, her voice calm but piercing, "arrogance costs lives, yours and your team's." The words hung in the air, simple but sharp, like a blade honed by years of truth. She turned, her boots steady on the gravel path, and walked toward General Daniel Coleman, who waited by the door. He offered a quiet nod, respect carved in his weathered face. "Will you advise the base, Sarah?" "We need your kind of wisdom." She considered it, her hand resting on her scarf, then gave a small nod. "For the ones who'll listen." No fanfare, no medals, just a promise to guide. She stepped into the Colorado sunset, the mountains glowing red, her battered SUV waiting in the lot, its outline sharp against the same red mountains she'd seen at dawn. As she drove off, dust trailing behind, the base seemed to exhale, forever changed by a woman who carried her past in silence. Her lesson lingered. Humility saves, pride kills. In life, look beyond the surface. Have you ever seen someone misjudged? Share their story in the comments. If this moved you, hit subscribe and ring the bell for more tales of quiet valor.